Hello, Rachel.
Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I just want to say at the top of this episode, goodbye, Spock. Goodbye, Spock. Just wanted to get that out of the way. We are the YumYumPodcast, obviously, because of the iconic line of dialogue delivered by the character Nan from Star Trek Discovery, who actually got to say some lines in this episode of Star Trek Discovery. It was very shocking.
And act like she's the security
Well,
chief.
she is, I guess. And she says a line of dialogue near the end of Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, the greatest Star Trek show ever made, of course, that stained our souls. It changed the color of our world. She said in reply to something, "Yum yum." And I've always known that yum and yum were words. And I've always known deep down that you could say yum yum. In fact, I've said yum yum to things before that moment. But when she said it in the episode at the end of Season 2, the way she said it, the when she said it, the why, the how, the all of it, really recontextualized my life. And it did yours as well, Rachel. And we said to ourselves, we need to re-watch Star Trek Discovery, re-watch it, so that we can recontextualize what we think of it. Because that line, Rachel, recontextualized our lives. And we are coming back, re-watching Star Trek Discovery, watching it for the first time since it aired. Hopefully improving and expanding our viewpoints upon the show. Thus far, it's been a very bumpy ride, but now, Rachel, we're here at the one of the top-rated episodes. I say top-rated.
What?
Because
What?
it keeps changing every so often.
Yes, because we are talking about the IMDb average user rating score, which obviously fluctuates.
It's always
depending on what the users are saying and how they are adding to the collective statistics.
The collective? This is Season 2, Episode 8. Comes in at an 8.2 currently. So, again, this is the top-rated one, or one of the ones. So this kind of shows that this... If memory serves as the title. This shows off that this is the top quality of the show. That this, in a way...
This is peak Discovery for people.
This is peak Discovery.
And it is also peak Discovery for me.
Oh, yes.
But
I 100% agree.
Not in a way that I appreciate.
For better or for worse, usually the top-rated episodes of any given show off in themselves the identity, the show, the strengths, or even the weaknesses. We have on our Patreon, we have been talking about the top 5 and bottom 5, and it is not unfamiliar there, even with the bottom or the top, that you can see the defining aspects of that given show, for better or for worse. So, we talk about top 5 rated episodes of TNG, or top 5 or bottom 5 rated episodes, and you can see the strengths and the weaknesses of that given show in either category. And whether it's a top 5 rated episode, you can still see the weaknesses that it was always prevalent in that show, but they don't affect that episode. This is, if memory serves, Season 2, Episode 8.
And what is the plot according to IMDb, Ryan?
I would love to hear how IMDb discusses what is the strengths, because as we've discovered, throughout Season 2, they always put the emphasis in the weirdest of places. Let's see if they get it right this time. Spock and Burnham head to Talos 4, where the process of healing Spock forces the siblings to confront their troubled past. Stamets desperately tries to reconnect with an increasingly disconnected Hugh, while Tyler struggles to shed the crew's suspicions of him due to his past as Vok.
The first 2 parts are correct. The third...
The Tyler stuff is somewhat right, but not... It's there, but it isn't.
That's not the emphasis of that part of the storyline.
It's the emphasis of the Hugh part, but not of... It's weird. We'll talk about it, I guess.
Part, but that also seems to be referring to, like, when he gets...
suspiciously like, you did it at the end.
He gets accused and confined to quarters.
Yes, but that's
That
more because
isn't
he's
what that is
It's
about.
because he's a shifty Section 31 agent who's working on an agenda completely different to theirs, and he's a liaison officer of a shady organization that is opposed to
Specialist
where
Tyler.
Discovery is heading towards. That was what I thought, but I guess it's because racism, because he's secretly a Klingon.
But not secret anymore.
No, not secret, but hey, Saru had some weird line in which even he doesn't understand what Vok was, because he says,
The Starfleet manual offers no regulatory guidelines for interactions between humans with Klingons grafted to their bones and a ship's doctor returned from the dead.
but it was the other way around, wasn't it? Wasn't Vok someone who was a Klingon who had human grafted? It doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
Even Saru doesn't know, and he's the smartest person on the ship, and he was there when all of that shit went down.
That's what I was about to say.
Even he doesn't know. So
He
why
doesn't.
should I?
I think the audience has to have a satisfying experience of the season. I think they have to feel it's come full circle and that they've had an arc.
This is the top-rated episode of Discovery. Our history with this show and our relationship, just to jump straight into it, Rachel, is we do not like this episode very much. We often point to this as an example of what we don't like about Star Trek Discovery, what we don't care for about its storytelling mechanisms, its visual style, its acting choices, the way its execution as a show is 100% concentrated within this episode, and it's the stuff that we do not like. It's not a shock to anyone who's listened to the show that you've come up to this episode. Were you really expecting us to be saying to you right now, we've always loved this episode, and we loved it even more on this watch? Did you expect that really? Because if you did, that's on you.
Let me use a metaphor. A few episodes back, we were saying that was the episode where we were like, okay, this is ridiculous. What is going on? We need to re-examine this show. And this episode was the one where we were like, okay, they're just reveling in being awful, because a large part of that was how this episode fully dives into pillaging the history of Star Trek.
This is the snake consuming itself. We've always, when we were watching the show originally and when we've been rewatching it, the constant dread of when the show Discovery sucks the dick of TOS and of Star Trek as a whole, instead of being its own story, its own characters, its own unique take on the show, has always been the thing we don't like, and it's always been on the fringes of stuff. We don't like the references. We don't like that she's related to Spock. We don't like Sarek. We don't like Amanda. We don't like all these things, right? That's been obviously stated. But this is the one where they just, instead of wading into the pool that they've already been going into of nostalgia, they just dive head first, straight off the bat. And I've got to say, I kind of respect the fact that they just fucking do it. It's poorly done to me, and it is poorly done for you. But I gotta give some props.
Go for it. It's no holds barred, just going for it.
Because they've been cock-teasing and ringing out this whole entire affair since the opening of the show of how much they are going to dive into the love of, or reference more so, of the original series. And this episode is just saying, you know what? We're not going to do foreplay anymore. We're just going to fuck. And I hate it. I don't like it. But at the same time, I do respect and appreciate the fact that they're no longer just giving us blue balls in that regard. Because although I don't like it, now that it's happened, I can go, oh, it's finally happened, and we can keep moving forward now. Because a part of the drama that we've had watching the entire show has been that terrible blue balling of, you remember this thing, right? You remember this, which was always leading to this episode. It was always leading to this one. When we started the show off the pod, Rachel and I would talk about what are we going to do when we get to that episode? Because it was a mess. Will it still be a mess? Rachel, was it still a mess?
Yes.
More or less, now that you know where the show goes.
Yes.
So it's more of a mess.
It's more of a mess in some regards and less in others, because it like the problems are huge, but I still found tiny little things that I kind of liked, which I did not notice on the first watch.
Yes, I agree.
But I also think that I wouldn't have seen those things, even if I had noticed them, as a positive.
Yes.
Because my scale was different on the first watch than it is on the second rewatch.
Yes.
Because I know how bad it gets, so the little things that aren't as bad feel better on this watch, because they aren't as bad as what it does.
We understand the mechanics of the show. We understand greater the ideology and the thought process of the writing of the show, more so than we did the first time round. The first time round, we're just trying to engage in the material week by week and trying to understand what we were offered up that week. Hence, it was weird when we first saw this because we didn't get the full scope of the larger narrative. This singular episode was just, hey, you remember Star Trek, right? And I'm sitting there going, I do. I'm supposedly watching it right now. And it annoyed me in that regard. I will say that I found it less of a mess on the rewatch for the one singular reason, and it's still a mess, but my singular reason why I found it less of a mess this time is because I surrendered myself to the episode far greater than the first time. The first time I saw it, I completely rejected everything. Oh, I do too. I completely rejected this episode. This was the one where I actually stood up at one point and walked out of the room while scenes were playing, which I don't do. I will just sit there. But when this was initially airing, my body, my mind, my soul, everything about me rejected this episode because it was the epitome of everything I've discussed that I don't like about this show. It has the horrible aesthetic. The lens flares are insufferable. I'm sorry, but if you think that scene in which Vina is standing behind Pike on the bridge and it's nothing but lens flares is an appealing aesthetic, I'm sorry to say this, but I find that you are objectively wrong.
The bridge or the ready room?
No, the bridge. The one on the bridge was the worst.
I found the ready room worse.
Either way, if you find that aesthetic pleasing, I'm sorry to say it, but to me, you're objectively wrong. And I reject, and that's where I'm at. That's where I was at. I rejected this episode fundamentally. However, on this watching, now I know where the whole show goes, where season 3 is currently at, where the end of this season is, where the first season went. I have surrendered.
And I still reject it.
I still reject many parts of it, but I surrendered myself to it in the way of, okay, this is what they're going to do. This is what they're going to do, and this is what they did, and here we are, and that's it. That's the episode. Instead of the first time where I said, no, they're not going to do that. Oh, they're going to do that? How fucking every single moment, every single beat, every single camera move, every single edit, every single music choice, every single line of dialogue, I fundamentally rejected the first time around. This time, I didn't because I'm watching it for this show. That's also the other reason why I didn't fundamentally reject it. Yeah. I'm watching it for our podcast to talk about it.
Okay, right.
I wouldn't watch this episode out of any other reason other than for this. I will never watch this episode again after we talk about it. When we talked about season 1, I said there'll be moments and scenes and maybe whole episodes I would go back to watch for analytic purposes, as well as maybe some minor entertainment. I will never want to come back to this episode ever again after we record this.
No.
See, that's still how much I still reject the episode, but having to watch it for this, I had to surrender myself to it in minor ways. And that was greater steps than the first time round, in which everything about it was wrong to me.
Okay, I want to say something about that whole attitude, because this was something that I was thinking a lot about during this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, that kind of attitude is now the way that the show represents the idea of consent. With, like, just bombarding you until you give up and say a reluctant yes.
For people like us, of course.
Yes. That's just a personal opinion, but that's just the way that I keep on seeing it, because that's the way that it for me, it plays out with Michael deciding to share that memory.
Yeah.
Because she says no, and then Vera says it'll be painful. Vina. It will be painful if you resist, so you just need to give it up.
Well, in the episode's defense, they do a poor job of doing this, but the Telosians are villains.
Yes.
But they don't make them that villainous in this episode
No.
because they are also merciful.
And they protect Spock, and they're like...
But in the cage, they were villains.
In the cage, they
were
were villains.
creepy weirdos that were evil, but they served a purpose, and Pike had a dynamic with them by the end of the episode.
But that's also kind of the way that things are playing out with the power dynamic with Giorgio and Leland. And then Pike with everybody. He has no agency. And, like, he's just being pushed around. And then he just says, well, okay, I'm doing it.
Yes.
Everybody's telling me to do it, so I'll do it.
But you're right. It's a bombarding feeling. And we're not going to spoil anything for season 3. But we are watching season 3, obviously. And that's overwhelmingly the sense that we've gone by season 3 of we're completely defeated, and we're finding that season very lackluster and dull because we've just completely surrendered ourselves to this show's mechanics. While with season 2, there's some thrilling stuff here because of the changeover halfway through, all of these weird choices we just don't understand. But there comes a point, and we're at it now, where there's just so much of the Star Trek aesthetic and the camera moves and the acting and the dialogue, and the lack...
The lens flares.
The lack of actual individual plot lines and episodes instead of just... set up points for further plot lines. Like, this episode has no plot
here so that they can do this thing here.
Yeah, it's just moving the pieces on the board. And
I don't think I appreciated just how much
season 1 had stories and episodes.
That too. But on the first watch, I don't think I realized just how much filler there was between episodes where they don't go to red signals.
I've been mentioning that throughout the season.
This episode, I was just like, oh, I didn't want to admit how right Ryan was about that, because then it's just like, well, that's over half of the episodes are even worse than I gave them credit for because they're filler.
Yep.
Because they're not talking about the red signals directly.
They're not filler in the way that we are accustomed to with television. They're filler in the terms of they set up the show to be the red signals are important.
Yeah.
But then when they don't discover the red signals, all of those what we call filler episodes are important plot element episodes to things that will pay off by the end. So they're set up episodes, but they feel like filler episodes because the show made a big song and dance in its promotion and it's in its setup that this is going to be about this red angel and the red signals. And have we really focused on any of that during the show? Not really at this point.
I need to hear about this red angel. You know what it is?
A human and nothing more.
It appears this person is attempting to change the outcome of our current timeline.
And what is that outcome?
A future in which all sentient life in our galaxy has been eradicated.
I miss episodes with plots. I miss them so much. The New Eden episode had a plot.
But it gives us 2 plots. It gives us the recap of the cage with kind of cool editing.
Yeah. Oh,
And-
no. Fuck no. No. Flashy editing does not always mean cool editing. And cool editing does not always mean good editing either, by the way. But my point is, when we watched season 1, the elements that stuck out were annoying because they were tacked on or intruding upon or interrupting an interesting plot in an episode. And we've been discussing that throughout season 2, right? Oh, this plot line is struggling because of all this garbage on top of it. But we're at this point now of each episode, not of the series as a whole, but of this each individual episode. We're at this point now where the changeover in writers has happened, and you have an episode like this, or the one previously that we discussed, where there's no individual episode plot. It is all serving larger narrative plots and calling back to previous Star Trek.
Just connecting the dots.
And I say I surrender myself to it because when we had something like the Obel for Sharon episode, and I was like, there's a great plot line here, but it's struggling underneath this, and this. I was angered by the fact that I could see a plot line
It doesn't
struggling.
feel like any plot line is buried underneath.
And that's what I'm saying.
It doesn't feel like it. It feels like, they've got some ideas.
It's
maybe.
all threads. It's all threads and no material. That's what this episode is, and that's what I feel very strongly about all the episodes after. Season 3 especially, and the threads of that one are far less interesting than the threads of this one currently, but we'll talk about Season 3 down the road. Let's talk about the good things of this episode, because you said that there were some minor things that you enjoyed, and as I've been saying very frequently, I wasn't as infuriated by this episode. So what were the positives of this episode? This is the highest rated episode of the show. What is so good about it to you? I will talk about apparently what's so good about it to everyone else, because I just sat down for half an hour and read through pretty much all of the IMDb reviews to understand. So I'll touch on them. But what worked about the episode for you? Because for me, it was just Pike.
That was a large part of it. For me, was Pike. I like that.
That was it. Just Pike.
He has various little choices that makes it feel like he's actually acting.
Oh, the performer? Yes.
Yeah. I appreciate that he's not wearing the stupid sneakers for the whole episode, because I don't like those.
Yeah.
I like that he's appears to be wearing something that's more similar to the original boots.
Did you have a favorite moment of Pike in the episode? A little thing he did, or statement, or belief he had? I did like the fact that he pulled Saru aside and said, "What the fuck was that all about, you fucking idiot? You dumb evolution boy."
Given the unusual nature of our circumstances, I'm going to overlook the incident, but this can't happen again. And please make sure everyone's aware that we will not be settling our differences with violence, but with the uniform code of conduct. And that goes for you as well.
I like that moment with Pike because it felt like not just an actor, but it felt like a captain talking down to someone and saying, look, I understand your thought process here. We are in unexpected territory with everything, but you need to do better next time, mister.
Yeah.
I'm very disappointed in you, because I was disappointed in Saru. I mean, I wasn't disappointed. I was fucking confounded by Saru. But at least that moment with Pike, it felt like I was watching a Star Trek show. The actions leading up to it, not so much, but that moment with him and Saru, it was great. And it reminded me of what I like about Saru, which is I like when Saru's in that position of being the second.
Yeah. I also enjoy in that scene the little bit of sassy Saru that we get.
But the sassy line he says makes
He's
no
wrong.
sense.
Yes, but I like seeing him getting to show off that side of Saru's character, even if objectively what he said was incorrect.
Or confusing, at least.
Or yes. I still liked seeing that dynamic being played out in that way, and Saru kind of still dealing with the repercussions of his evolution.
Yeah.
Which, it gets thrown out very quickly. So even some small reference feels like something.
I will say that another thing I did appreciate about this episode, if this is pulling teeth for me really, because I have a hard time thinking of positives, but another positive I will give the episode to try and steer outside of Pike, because it's oh so easy to give it to Pike all the time. I didn't mind. How do I even describe this without sounding like a hypocrite? I didn't mind how they had Arium just being evil in the background throughout the whole episode.
Yes, that
It sounds
that
hypocritical because
makes
it's done so
sense.
poorly, though, as well. Like, it's so obvious, and they have
yeah.
her sinister robot noises every time she's doing something evil, just to remind you that
Yeah.
she's evil. But
yeah, we gotta do that. We
I
gotta do
did
that. I-
minorly appreciate her doing that, and her being smart enough to set up Ash Tyler for the fall.
Yes.
Because I also think Ash is annoying, and I want to see him fall so hard, so I'm on
That
her
does make sense.
side.
I am noticing more on this rewatch how much they are referencing what Control currently is, and
Yes.
how it's got a really big influence over the actions of Section 31 already.
And Giorgio's worried about that.
Yes.
She doesn't like
She doesn't
AIs.
trust it.
So it's a nice setup there, minorly, for Control. But that's one of those ones where that one benefits more on a rewatch because we're specifically trying to notice it.
Yes.
On the initial watch, flew by because they just say Control here and there, and we don't fully understand what Control is. Even at this point, I don't fully understand. Is there any other positives?
I think that it makes sense that Ash Tyler keeps on telling Pike to trust Burnham, because that's what he would do, and he's giving Pike the advice from his perspective, which makes sense because Tyler doesn't fully align himself with Section 31. He doesn't fit in Starfleet, and he doesn't fit on Kronos, so he's kind of trying to make it work with Section 31.
I will disagree, but that is your perspective. All I saw in that was the writers using Ash Tyler to tell us, the audience, to trust in Michael, which is a trick they've often used before.
When Leland reaches Spock and Burnham, he will bury them. Discovery search only shines a light on her. What are you saying? Trust Michael to find the right way through. Ultimately, it's a safer choice for both of them.
This is an episode that is highly regarded because, having read through IMDb reviews, so these are just audience members' perspectives, these aren't critics, it is the episode that everyone likes because it is You Remember Star Trek, and it blends Star Trek Discovery's continuity and the original series continuity in this big way. It is the episode that does that. Everyone loves this episode because I know who Spock is, I know what the cage is, or I know of the cage, or I know of Spock, I know of Talos 4. All the IMDb reviews pretty much that love this episode and give it a 10 out of 10 do it because, you can read it yourself, is it blends the two things together. And I like the two things, and I like that the two things have met. Or I like the one thing really, 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 and I like that the other thing has met it. Everyone likes this episode because nostalgia seems to be the very strong thing. Or even if you don't have nostalgia for the show, the sense of nostalgia that this has, the sense of legacy. Because even if you did not grow up with Star Trek, and even if you did not watch The Cage, this episode imports that sense of legacy and importance of the franchise.
Yeah, and it makes it more concrete that Discovery has an appreciation and a value for what came before it in terms of Star Trek canon.
Yes.
More than just mentioning things.
You watched this episode, and correct me if I'm wrong, you watched, if memory serves, before having seen The Cage. If I'm correct in that assumption.
Yes, definitely before I saw the original
The Cage.
original unaired pilot. I think I may have seen
Menagerie,
which
is the combining
reuse
the reuse.
footage.
It's a great. Those episodes are great in terms of how they did that, but. This episode is taking a lot from The Cage. It is saying, hey, remember The Cage? We're going to import stuff from The Cage. There's the Telosians and Vina and the plants. You remember the plants, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did this episode to you, outside of the clip show, which we'll talk about more, did this episode to you as a singular episode communicate effectively what happened in The Cage and the events of The Cage and why The Cage is important to this episode?
No, not really.
What did it do wrong? Or how did it not do that?
For me, it landed in between explaining enough so if you hadn't watched it that it made sense, and explaining so little that it assumed that you'd watched it.
You nailed it. That's exactly what I was going to say. It does that weird middle ground where it's saying stuff to fill you in, but it's also not saying enough because it assumes you already know this.
So I don't fully remember what it was like in terms of that stuff on the first watch. But for this one, now that I have watched all of TOS, including The Cage, I was just like, wait, that doesn't sound right. Is that actually the way that it happened? Because they slightly altered the way that things are presented in terms of the clip show at the beginning, but also the way that they reference it. So I kept on being like, wait, am I remembering that wrong? Or are they? And then I was like, no, they're just trying to slightly twist it so that it suits exactly what they need.
They twist things, they alter things, they add things, they remove things from The Cage. And that is fine. It's not for me, but I say it's fine because that's what I've come to accept from Star Trek Discovery. I've come to accept that. However, this episode spends 2 whole minutes, practically, showing you clips from that 1960s unaired pilot, and the juxtaposition between just seeing those clips and seeing this interpretation does a disservice to this episode to me, because I could swallow that pill a little easier if we didn't have the clips from the beginning showing us what the show's interpretation of this used to be. Then this episode comes along and the Telosians are nothing like how they were, and even the clips that they showed at the beginning of the episode. I was in a whiplash throughout the whole episode because it showed us at the very beginning what happened in The Cage, or elements of The Cage, and the complete opposite of it is happening in the actual episode. The planet that they land on does not look anything like the clips that they showed, and I'm not saying that they had to recreate it, but they showed clips of, hey, look, there's grass. So what do we see when they land? Quarry. We see that quarry area again, Rachel. Remember that from the Woofin side? The rocks and the debris.
Oh, we're very familiar with that quarry.
And everything's grey and desaturated with a hue of greenish blue everywhere, and it looks terrible. And I'm not saying that they needed to make it look like this janky 1960s set, or they needed to have the acting be like how it was in that. But when they show the clips, and then they cut to their version, I can't help but be thrown off completely because they're completely different.
The CG heads also look like shit.
Yeah, the CG elements of the characters, the veins, and it just it throws you off. And I think it does a poor job of explaining what The Cage is, because it does have that element of, you should know what this is already. And this keeps going into my question of...
It assumes that you haven't watched it in a while, so you don't really
hence the clip
remember. But, and in that way, it's just kind of like, well, we can change things because you haven't watched The Cage in ages, so you don't remember exactly what it is.
And I haven't watched The Cage in a little while, so I don't even remember exactly what they get right or wrong either. But throughout the whole episode, I was constantly asking myself that question that annoys people. One of our listeners I was talking to a little while ago about this, he gets bothered by the fact that I ask, who's this show for? And they say, it's for people like me, who's only, like, I've encountered Star Trek, but this is showing me Star Trek, and it's getting me interested. I see this episode, and it makes me want to see the cage. It makes me want to read about it. And they even said the statement of, it makes me want to see how accurate they got it. And that is a large portion of people when I read the IMDb reviews. And I say to myself, why can't the episode just communicate this effectively in its own story? Why does it need to have that element of,
It doesn't want to. It doesn't want to. That's not part of the aims of the creative focus of this show.
No.
That's not what they want to do, and that is fine. That is fine for them to do, but it is because that they don't seem to be sticking to that.
What did this episode serve to the characters that are from this show? This is what Spock's all about. But Spock's not from Star Trek Discovery. Spock's not a character that will remain in Star Trek Discovery. Spock does not matter to this show. He only matters to this show because, remember Star Trek? I do remember Star Trek. I am currently watching it. I want to experience the characters that you have put forward in your show. I want more of Paul. I want more of Hugh. I want more of Tilly. I want more of Saru. I want more of even Michael. You do a disservice when you do this to these characters. And people don't like these characters. I don't like some of these characters either. But God forbid that you should at least make the show about them. Because this episode and a lot of this season is, oh, well, we're exploring the Spock that you never knew about. But Spock's not a character of this show. So what does that experiment, what does that achieve? What does that achieve? And this is an episode where you point to that and go, remember the cage? Yeah, I remember the cage. People remember the cage. What does remembering the cage serve to Star Trek Discovery? Other than we want to tap into the legacy of Star Trek, a thing that we did not create, but we are tapping into it because nostalgia, because people love Spock. I love Spock too. Evidently I do. But what I like about Spock does not matter to this show, because this show should be its own thing. Yes, it's in the Star Trek universe. Yes, it's a prequel. Yes, you're going to have this, and this. But even characters like Pike, he's going to leave. He wasn't even here at the beginning. What do these elements serve to this show's actual identity? Nothing.
But Burnham has the guts to ask the question that we were all thinking, which was, do you really think the beard looks good?
Is there a valuable question in your arsenal?
Yes, do you actually think the beard is working?
This episode opens with a 2-minute clip show from the cage, and it's arrogantly edited. You remember the music from Star Trek, right? You remember the costumes? We're going to have this actress who plays Vina, and she's going to be wearing this 1960s style costume, which goes completely against the aesthetic of what Star Trek Discovery has gone for. So when people make the argument of, well, you can't hold Star Trek Discovery up to the pedestal of the 60s show because it's got to look different because it's for a modern audience. But then when Vina rocks up and she's dressed like the 1960s show, I can't process that thought process anymore, because they just made a dress like that because they had to show clips from the 1960s show to explain to the audience what the fuck the plot of this episode is.
Okay, Ryan.
What the fuck is the plot of this episode? We can't tell you throughout the story. We need to show you. Wait, we need to show the audience. I'm trying to think of this as the writers. The plot of this episode relies so heavily on a 1960s unaired pilot, which most people have probably not actually seen for themselves, right? Star Trek fans have seen it. But again, this isn't a show for people who are heavily into Star Trek, right? My friend who I talked to a few weeks ago, who gets annoyed when I ask, who's this show for? They haven't seen The Cage, right? Many people who have not watched Star Trek have evidently not watched The Cage. So when this show is made for people to ingratiate them into Star Trek, to view them into Star Trek, come in. You know, we're making this for you, people who don't know Star Trek as well. When you have an episode like this, I try to think, how do they solve the problem that they create for themselves? Because this is a problem they created for themselves. This is the snake swallowing itself of, it's so referential, it's so steeped in the legacy and the lore. How does someone who does not understand that legacy and lore get into it? Oh, I know. We have to show them a clip show, a previously on Star Trek, to explain the plot of this fucking episode. They have to show you a previously on from an episode from 50 years ago. That was an unaired pilot. I've never seen a show do that before. And I think that says a lot about the incompetency of the series storytelling.
Would it have been better or worse if they recreated those clips with the current technology and the current actors rather than using the clips from the unaired pilot?
That's a loaded question, because my answer would, of course, be yes. I think it would be better. It would make logic with how this show operates already. But the problem is, they need to have a clip show to remind you of what happened in an episode.
But why
from
not just
50...
use those 2 minutes instead and have a flashback? Not like Spock maybe remembering because he's unstuck in time.
Because Spock had barely anything to do in the actual cage. That was Pike's story.
Yes, but a large part of this episode that they keep on referring to and do nothing with, in my opinion, is the fact that he's experiencing time as a fluid construct. So, if it went back and it's as if Spock is remembering those moments and experiencing them again, and then it butting into how he's experiencing it when he's returning
that
with
could have worked.
Burnham.
That could have worked.
And then it's maybe the same thing when they contact Pike, that they throw him off, because part of the Telosians is also that they experiencing time a little bit differently.
Well, they have a lot of psychic
other
abilities,
things.
yeah.
So if it's just like them trying to tap into, and they're thinking about their memories of
You're
Pike
right.
in order to reach out to him.
You're right. That could have worked better. They went the easy route of, let's actually show the clips, let's actually get the music, let's actually get everything, the font and everything, because IMDb commenters will write, oh, it's a thing I know and I got to see it again. I love it. Jeffrey Hunter's performance got to be seen by people who haven't seen it before. That's great.
To me,
what you
it's
said
a
makes more
difference.
sense. What you say makes more sense, but I know the writer's mentality of,
Yes.
I want the easy way. So let's just take images directly from it and just plant it in, even if it doesn't make sense for how we've visually and aesthetically and thematically set up our own show.
Obviously, we look more modern than the original series because we are in a modern world now, and we if we made the show look that way, people would not feel that it was worth the money.
Pike in this episode, his whole entire story is people are just railroading him from left to right, and that's why I found him the most compelling character, because he had to take the position of Starfleet captain dealing with internal problems. He's dealing with them even to a higher degree. The internal issue of his relationship with Vina is still an internal issue. It's an issue that he had from years ago. He has this weird relationship with her. People who know Pike's journey knows what his relationship will be with her in the future. I'm not going to get into that because that's something that the show will get into later.
Yes.
But I like that about this episode. I actually liked Pike's story because it's him dealing with problems. And I like when characters actually have to deal with problems. He's dealing with Ash Tyler being a little bitch. He's dealing with Leland being a little bitch. He's dealing with Saru being a little
like
bitch.
a captain throughout the whole thing.
He's micromanaging. And every single step of the way, pretty much, I kept writing in my notes, Pike is right. Pike is right. And it's satisfying in the way that he's actually right and not the way that they make Michael's always right. Because Pike is right from a professional standpoint, while Michael is right from a spiritual standpoint all the time because she has faith.
That's a fantastic way to put it.
And that's what I like about Star Trek. I like seeing professionals. I like seeing people who know what they're talking about and demonstrating their knowledge. While Michael is often has many lines of, and so does Spock in this episode, you've got to have faith. This is the defining experience. Love will save us. All of these emotional and you've got to just believe. Pike, he has these little moments too, but throughout most of the episode, he is saying, look, I understand this, but from a professional standpoint, I've got to put my foot down this way. Even down to at the end when he's like, well, guys, we're going to go against orders, and everyone's like, we get it, let's get on the go. Even though that was a little too cheesy for me, I appreciated that because Pike is a Starfleet character.
Yeah.
And we didn't have any other character in the episode that was a Starfleet character. Saru had his moment, and for some reason, they didn't let him do it. They just let them fight because they wanted to have a fight scene.
Yeah. It's exciting, Ryan.
We're at that point, Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to just blast through it. There's too many details to talk throughout the episode, but like I'm looking at my notes and I've got so many random things written down that I'm like, we could do an hour-long discussion on each one of these points. Like Giorgio's whole entire thing. We don't have time for Giorgio. We've got to talk about what
Chili only had a few lines and she still managed to be really annoying to me.
Yeah, we got so many lines that are like, okay, we just don't have time.
Okay.
We wish we could, but we've got to talk about Michael.
I want to do 2 lines before we get into Michael.
Okay.
Well, I'll go with Michael-related ones.
Okay.
Which is, we really are on the other side of the looking glass now.
That was the sting. That was a stinger. That was a cold open. That was the end of that. Mm-hmm. Ooh.
Oh, there are a lot of bangers.
Yeah, there's too many.
But I'll go with another Michael one, which is where I come from. The one holding the phaser asks the questions. Because, that's Starfleet.
Yeah, well, she's acting rogue. Okay, there's too much to talk about.
They do bring up that she does mutiny again.
Yeah, well,
at least
it's not her alone this time. The whole crew does.
No, this is when
I know it's before that, but by the end of the episode, the whole crew has mutinied, so it's fine.
Or is it more treason at that stage?
It's all the same. There's too much to talk about within this episode. There's so many lines, there's so many random stories. We don't have time. We could do a whole 10-part series on this episode because there's just too much. We've got to move on to Michael and Spock because this is what the episode is, right? This is what happened.
They are the heart of this episode.
This is the 2 main things of the episode is remember Star Trek and more importantly, this is why Star Trek. You know what I mean?
What made Spock?
Because Spock is an emotionally distant person. It's not because he was raised as a Vulcan. It's not because of his toxic relationship with Sarek, and it's not because of his distant relationship with Amanda, as they've already established. Amanda didn't give enough. No. It's because of Michael Burnham, a character from this show. She's the reason for why Star Trek is...
She's the most important person in the universe, so it makes sense that she's the most important person in Spock's life.
She's the bedrock of Spock.
You value our connection. Perhaps the bedrock of your logic is this relationship.
Absurd.
Michael is the reason for why Spock is Spock. And then Spock goes off to help Jim become Jim, and Jim helps Bones become Bones, and Bones becomes... And it just spirals out from there. She is this linchpin character in the canon of Star Trek. And even if she was a good character that we liked, I wouldn't like that. Because it removes the individuality of every single aspect of those characters and boils it down to a singular moment did it
flattens
all.
everything. It makes everything less interesting because it's just like, well, it's just that. It just becomes a straight line, which is so much less interesting.
All the complexities of Spock, of Kirk, of Star Trek, the original series and later down the road, are completely wiped off the board because you can just pinpoint it all down to Michael called Spock a half-breed, and her bigotry ingrained itself into Spock and made him the man we know.
Without that moment, he never would have been in Starfleet.
Instead of the complexities that life has, that they imbued into the show already, even in Star Trek Discovery, they boil it all down to Michael said one insulting phrase, and that insulting phrase stuck in Spock's craw so much it made him become the man we know. I hate that type of storytelling because I understand that there are triggering moments in everyone's lives. There's always the what made this person this. You can always pinpoint it down to this one specific moment. But from a storytelling perspective, it's very trite and very overdone at this point. It can be done very effectively, but it is so tiring when you do it like this because it removes all the complexities. I point to another show that does these things very well. Better Call Saul is a show that is currently on at the same time, and that show is exploring the question, is exploring of what made this character become Saul Goodman from Breaking Bad.
What problem does becoming Saul Goodman solve?
That's the question that show's thesis statement is. Instead of how did he become Saul Goodman, it becomes the question of what problem does becoming Saul Goodman solve, and that goes into a myriad of different complexities. He doesn't just become Saul Goodman because someone called him a fuckhead or someone called him a mean word. It's a series of events. This show boils down that and just boils it down to one single phrase did it. And I think that's lame. I think it's lame. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. Like, the equivalent that comes to mind for me is if everything happened in Harry Potter because Draco called Harry a muggle or a half-breed one time.
Oh,
even though
if he called Hermione that.
Yeah. Well, both of them would be incorrect for Harry.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, if that was the case.
No. To go on to that, it's exactly that of Hermione's only the legend that she became because Draco called her a name.
Yes.
No. The reason Hermione is a great character because there's several things going on with her character. It's not just that one singular thing.
No, but
it's not because of that one incident that happened in page 14 of the book of the second book or whatever, right? It is a series of events. But they boil it down to everything that Spock is because of one single insult.
Yeah.
Well, before, here's what I mean. Well, before, this is what we've traded in. In the original series and in the movies, Spock is the way he is because of he's a half-breed who's raised on a logical planet. He is subjected to bullying by other Vulcans, whether they be children or adults, even his own father. He's subjected to multitudes of prejudice, not just a single moment of prejudice, but a lifetime of prejudice in a way
from a
culture that is supposed to be enlightened and logical. And they see him as illogical in some ways, shape, or form. And most importantly, to me, one of my favorite moments of seeing the inner conflict of Spock is actually from Star Trek V, the worst Star Trek movie. His brother, stepbrother, half-brother, whatever he is, Cyborg, who's mysteriously absent from all of this, by the way. Weird that. From a show that's like, oh, everything's canon. It's weird that Cyborg's not around and never mentioned. Weird that. It's okay. He was a terrible character, but he has the power of getting your most triggering moments and your moments of pain that you've held on to. And Spock's moment of pain from Star Trek V does a greater job explaining to me why Spock is Spock than this does, which is he is literally born. He has just been born. He has just come out of Amanda, and he is handed to Sarek, and he's crying because he's a baby, a freshly born baby. And Sarek, in his emotional, detached way, and not just because he's a Vulcan, but because Sarek is a terrible father, looks at this child, sees it crying, and says something along the lines of, "So human," and physically passes it on to someone else. That moment there says so much more about what Spock had to go through his entire life than a random stepsister, a random adopted sister who's come into his life when he was like 8 years old, called him a half-breed once. Like, I get it. It's a really devastating thing to happen, right? If your sibling called you something like that, called you a slur like that, it would be hard, right? And I'm not saying that I'm not denying that, but the
His
way
humanity was beautiful.
and she crushed it into the dirt when you're swapping out all of the stuff I just said for that. Because again, this show doesn't want to say that Sarek's a bad father. They want Sarek to be this beautiful, smiling, happy-go-lucky guy who loves so openly, and not that he was a bad person in any way. No, they've got to say that for Michael, who's perfect all the time, except for when she's not, and it's always, when she's not, it's always catastrophically she's not. She's a mutineer, she does this, and here's the moment of, she fucked Spock so much, he had to become Spock. As much as I don't like Star Trek V, they actually handled that so much better than this. And isn't that kind of embarrassing, Rachel?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I fully agree that that's just... It's so dumb. It's so dumb.
You are Vulcan. And you will always be cold and distant, like a moon somewhere.
We've often talked, mainly me, that I do not like Michael Burnham partly because of they import this legacy onto her. And this is the episode that does that. Michael Burnham is the reason for Spock is Spock, and Spock being Spock is the reason for everything else, and that means you would not have Star Trek the way we know it, or have ever known it, if it wasn't for Michael Burnham. And I hate that type of storytelling. She is epic. She's not human. She's not a character. She is just an epic being who everything she does is perfect, and even her imperfections lead to perfection because her imperfect moment, her character flaw moment made Spock the hero we know. And the journey of this season of her reconciling with Spock and her telling Spock to reach out to people who are different from him will inspire him to form a friendship with Captain Kirk, even though in this episode they show that he has a really warm, happy, friendly relationship with Captain Pike, a man who's different to him. So this whole journey she's going to go on with Spock to inspire him to reach out to people who are different from him doesn't even make sense because he's already achieved that before he's rocked up in Discovery. How embarrassing.
Yeah, I got nothing to say. Because that is just it. It is just embarrassing to us that this is the way that they choose to do it. These are the shortcuts that they are taking. And in this episode, it feels worse because they're harping on something that was more successful. Even in the case of an unaired fucking pilot.
Yep.
Where the clips that they show from that episode had me more invested and more interested in that episode than what happens.
We've talked about the scene in which she calls him a half-breed, because that's all this storyline of Michael and Spock really does. They use the Telosians, they use Vina, they use Talos 4 as a reason, logically in the story, to make that come to light. They use it because you remember the Telosians reference. Let's use an old school reference to make the reveal of why Michael and Spock don't like each other more impactful, because they could have just done it as them talking or revealed in story or revealed in a flashback, but they had to use a reference to jump it off. But could you please talk about very much how the scene itself plays out in terms of like the way that they decided that they are going to communicate this flashback?
Okay. So, before I do that, we need to take a step back.
50 years to an unedited pilot, and I'll show you a 2-minute clip show of what that was.
No, not quite that far. To earlier in the episode when we first see the way that Spock is sharing his memories with Burnham through the Telosians.
Yes.
Because within that, we were already confused with the way that things were working.
Yes.
And that set up that Burnham could, like, kind of visually insert herself into Spock's memories
As Spock.
that he was showing her either as Spock or as, like, as herself outside of Spock, but, like, in
Or
the
as
room.
herself in the memory that Spock is recollecting.
Yes.
Yes.
So then that is already set up, but not very clearly.
It's a little clunky, yeah.
It's odd. I got really confused when it seemed like they were reusing footage of her memory, even though she was meant to be living in Spock's memory.
And he wasn't there for the memory that you thought that this flashback clip was.
So I got very confused. So then we have at the end where Michael is being forced.
Yes.
Forced.
Telosians are bad.
Not consenting like they try and make it out to be.
Well, Telosians are evil.
Yep. And that's what they should be focusing on, but they don't.
Or at least menacing. They're not menacing in this at all.
No.
I always found the Telosians kind of creepy because they were women, right? With makeup on, and they dubbed them over with male voices, and there was just something in the veins, and there's just something off about the Telosians, but not in this. Not in this. Their makeup sucks ass.
Yes. So Michael is sharing her memory, she is forced to give payment, even though Spock wouldn't care about sharing the memory, so I don't know why he isn't asked to pay.
Well, because he can't think in linear time.
But then magically
Because
he
Michael's our
can.
main character, so she has to sacrifice something because she's the defining moment. She's the pillar of it all. She's the bedrock.
It wouldn't be a conflict if Spock was being asked to do it because he wouldn't care. So
Yeah.
it has to be her. Has to be her.
Yeah.
Anyway,
She feels guilt.
Just needed to explain that first.
Yes.
Because that is part of the context for this scene. Generally, Discovery doesn't spend a lot of time working on context, but
But it's for kings.
yes, it's for kings.
And kinks.
That too. So we then have Michael remembering the scene, and then they have it played out partially
Yeah.
by the actors of the younger version of
Child actors,
themselves. So they have like child Spock and child Burnham that we've seen in various flashbacks throughout the season.
Sometimes it'll be them interacting, sometimes it'll be adult Michael and child Spock,
shifts.
and it shifts randomly.
It shifts relatively randomly. It's not strictly like it starts off as both of them being the child and then one of them becoming the adult version talking to the child version of the other, and then they both become adults. It's not strictly linear in that fashion. There are a few swaps back and forth, which
Yes.
makes it more confusing, because if it was just like both children, one adult, both adults. That would be a little bit easier to follow, but because it keeps on flicking between them, and at least I couldn't tell any deliberate purpose between the choice of line and the actor that they chose to show saying that line.
It is a weirdly directed scene, to say the least, because you could have played it out with just the kids, and then maybe near the end they become the adult versions for the more serious moment. Or you have it as Michael is witnessing the two children, or you have it just be the two of them as adults, and we understand that this was a memory of them as kids, right? I can understand that, but they do this weird, let's have everything in the kitchen sink in. And one of the things I want to ask you is,
At least when she was invading Sarek's memory earlier,
in season
then
1,
it was consistent.
it was consistent because she was witnessing herself in Sarek's mind. But that was a synthetic mind meld, which has never been used again and never will be. Sarek vision.
Sarek vision.
I want to ask you, what were the, outside of them switching between hilarious child performances, that kid Spock is fucking funny. I love him so much. He's such a creepy little weirdo. But outside of that, outside of the switching between, I want to ask you, what were the rules happening within this memory?
What rules? I don't know any.
Okay, so that's a great thing. You don't know what the rules were. You look at me. I asked this because I was watching the scene and I thought I had an understanding of what it was. I was going, oh, she's just reliving the experience. So it's like she's herself and she's going through it. Like, here I am, I'm going through the scene. But there's a moment near the end when she's about to call him a half-breed, and adult Michael, she's facing the camera, she's facing away from him, and you can tell it's adult Michael going, oh, I really am embarrassed by the fact that I'm now going to say half-breed. That's how it came across to me. And it made me go, wait, so is this Michael, the adult, acting out the scene, even though she knows that I've got to say half-breed here, but I really don't want to? Or was that how she was as a child? And I don't know what the rules of the memory were. Usually in a film and a show, they have clear defining rules, even if they don't say them out loud, just by the way it's acted, the way it's directed, the way it's edited. They have clear definers of how a flashback, how a dream operates. But in this, I could not tell if this is how the scene originally played out when they were children, or if this was Michael is role-playing her way through that scene, even to its bitter end. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I don't know what the rules were. I just don't know which one it's supposed to be. I just don't know. And then, obviously, the big thing in the scene that the episode just does not want to touch, weirdly, is she calls him a half-breed, right? They want to touch that. But they don't want to touch it to its full coherent scope, because they say, oh, well, I know you did it to hurt me, so I would detach myself from you so that you could escape, and blah, 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 blah. And, oh, I feel bad because I didn't want separatists to hurt you. This, and this. They don't touch upon the scene. They don't really touch upon the fact that Michael is a racist.
No, they don't deal with that. Why would they, Ryan? It's about the emotional core.
They touch upon it in the way that she said the phrase, right? And it's a racist slur. It's a slur. But they don't touch upon the fact that it meant that her character, then and now, had that viewpoint within them the whole time. Because you just don't do that, right? Without having some internal viewpoint of that. Right? You don't just call a black person the N-word flippantly unless you, deep down somewhere within you, have that minor bigotry. Not saying that she's 100% a bigot, but what I'm saying is, when she's a child, and even now, because she's still justifying it, it's a justification of bigotry, but the show's not saying that deep down that was some minor form of bigotry like they have done throughout all of Star Trek. Throughout all of Star Trek, they come to terms with the fact that Bones is a bit of a bigot to Spock. They don't do that here, and it feels really weird for a show that is so progressive.
You weird little half-breed.
So now I am left utterly exhausted and bewildered, so I think it's time for the Huda.
Da-da-da-da-da-da, Huda.
Bam!
So you're feeling existential dread? Perfect time to talk about Dr. Hugh Culber's journey throughout the show.
Absolutely. Okay, so I mentioned that we have a lot of banger lines.
We do have a lot of banger lines, and
And-
most of them are from fucking Hugh.
But
or Ash.
the one that I want to bring up is actually from Stamets.
Oh, Paul.
Our lovely Paul. I'm just trying to treat it like what it is. A miracle that I dreamed about every night.
Again, going to the faith aspect. Miracle. Whenever I think of someone saying miracle, I always think of Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1, in which there's a horse named Miracle. And whenever they have lines like that, it's actually cuts to,
Yeah.
oh, it's actually about the horse. There was a lot of comedy in Hugh's stuff, unironically, because what is the plot that Hugh is suffering through for the rest of the season that this episode is delving into? Because Hugh's angsty.
Yes, it is about his crisis of being brought back to life and having all the memories of his past life, including his death,
Yes.
and how he is not comfortable diving back in where he left off,
As if
even
nothing
though
happened.
that is what Stamets is trying to do. He's trying to make him comfortable. He's
Yeah.
trying to get him back to where he was, because for Stamets, it's like, well, you're alive now, so we can forget the part where you died and just go back to like a week before where everything was fine and happy and we were in love, and then we can just ignore the part where you died because you're alive now, so that doesn't count.
Yep.
And Hugh just continually throws things and has a hissy fit saying that he can't do that.
Okay, so they even have what this storyline and what it will be about in the actual episode, word for word, because the writers are lazy. But they do it like this, where Paul says, uncharacteristically and out of nowhere, he says, oh, this is a medical problem, blah, blah, blah. This is not an identity issue, Paul. I mean,
Yes.
Hugh. And it's like, where the fuck did that... Oh, it's because the writers is telling us this is an identity issue story, guys. Because
What? They don't do shortcuts.
because
We
Hugh's
know
story...
that they do the groundwork.
Because
They do the heavy lifting, these writers.
I like this idea a lot, actually. This storyline idea,
it
because
makes sense.
because what Hugh's suffering is a real philosophical and existential quandary, because he has died, he has been remade. He's basically a new version of the Hugh who died, and it is questioning free will,
And
it is
I
questioning life,
think-
death, it is questioning immortality in a way, it's questioning a
They
lot of
rush it.
things.
They rush it as well. I think that the scene with Paul
Mm.
and Hugh having dinner should have been in one episode, and then the inner where he first sees Ash should be in
Right.
another, and then the fight.
But that
should
means that
have-
it would give
'cause then
Hugh
it
more
was-
stuff to do.
Then it would have been built up over time. It would have felt like it was a tension,
Rachel,
and it was being slowly ratcheted up.
they've been building
but-
that though.
But it doesn't. It thinks that it does that.
Well,
but
it has
It
been.
hasn't done it enough for me to be satisfied.
It has been with the whole Scar thing last time we
Yeah.
saw him, but
Like there have been things, and they've been setting up
Hmm.
that Hugh is not comfortable and hasn't immediately like snapped back
isn't it
to
great?
just being himself.
Yeah,
But I don't think that they've done that work enough with the tension between him and Ash, and him using that as an avenue to explore the anger and the angst that he's having with his own identity by projecting that onto the person who murdered him.
I like this idea. Again, theory-wise. Execution-wise, leaves a lot to be desired, because we've seen characters die and resurrect, and Harry Kim, that was his whole character, right?
Yeah.
And to the point in which the real Harry Kim died in, like, season 3 in Deadlock, and has been replaced with new Harry Kim, and same with Naomi Wildman. And it's an interesting way to explore that age-old thing we've seen before and actually give it some oomph and give it a new journey to go on.
It could have been good, but the way that it's done, it's not good to us.
There's just little things. Like, it's very weird that they've made Captain Pike this really smart, empathetic guy who's aware of the situation, yet at no point did he think it would be unwise to have Ash be on the same deck as them.
Yeah,
even before Hugh has come back. What, on the same deck as Paul? I mean, he still murdered his, like, the love of his life, but okay. There's little things like that, but the most important thing is you're saying you want build-up. You want a foundation. You want something to make this feel natural.
I want groundwork. I want to feel like the characters are characters, not mouthpieces for the writers.
Not pieces on the board. And that's why we have the whole Huda, is... look at how they built the foundation for his character. It does not translate to this story. The idea of what this story is pretty concrete to me. Even to me, I think that this could have worked even without the things that you wanted as build-up if we actually got to know who Hugh was as a character. If Hugh was more than just an extension of Paul.
Oh, yeah.
If we actually got to know him in that first season.
Things that we could do that would fix it within this episode. If you go back... But the same things apply, doing the groundwork,
Rachel,
building things up.
Well, you can't judge this as just an episode. It's part of a larger narrative.
And
See
I'm
how that logic can be
I
used like this too, guys?
I want that. I want them to have sown the seeds and to see things grow, not being told, hey, we made these things in the hydroponics bay and we gave them steroids, so now they're seeds and now they're fully grown and it's a tree.
And Kez is going to eat them.
And the dirt.
And the dirt. That's a deep cut Voyager reference for you people out there. I think that this story is so interesting theory-wise, but execution-wise, I don't know who Hugh is. So when he's doing all of this stuff, all I see is forced relationship drama. And I hate relationship drama most of the time, especially if I don't have any understanding of the relationship to begin with, which I've already commented on. I don't really have an understanding because they never showed us enough of them as a relationship, because they thought the foundation of their relationship would build after Hugh died, not before, which is
we often
confounding.
Assumed that they were married,
when they're not.
Forgetting that they're just
There's
partners.
just assumptions, but you don't actually see anything of the relationship. So seeing it crumble and deteriorate and have tension here, I don't feel anything for it because I don't know it. Again, to call back to Better Call Saul, I genuinely worry about the main relationship in that show because I understand them as individual characters as well as characters in a relationship. I don't understand who Hugh is as a character, and I don't understand him as a partner.
Okay.
So
There's
I don't
something
care
else that I want to bring up.
I don't care about his little relationship drama, even if it does have an interesting existential quirk to it. At the end of the day, all this is forced drama to last for the season, and that's exactly what it is, especially now that season 3 has aired. It's almost as if this whole entire thing never happened, and when you're watching it, it is just wading through concrete, that wet concrete that's just drying on you, and you're just sinking further and further until you just crush to death. It is joyless to watch this.
Okay, there is another thing that I would like to bring up, which is Hugh related, but also Stamets related, because a large part of this episode is around their relationship.
Yep.
And it's something that I wish that they'd brought back.
Yeah.
Which is the idea that Stamets Paul was willing to give up his life's work and leave Discovery, leave it all behind,
Yeah.
move to Vulcan because he couldn't deal with being on Discovery without Hugh.
Yep.
And in this episode, he's talking about how he's using his personal leave because he has so much of it built up.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they should have called back to that idea of it being like, well, you are more important than my work. Like, we're dealing with this mission,
But
and whatever you need, if you need time away from Starfleet, we should use our leave. I can get a job so that we can have money and we can start a new life together.
Yep.
Instead, like, because he realizes quickly that the idea of picking up where they left off isn't working for Hugh. So I think that it would have made sense for Paul to bring up that opportunity of, well, we can both start fresh. Like, you know,
Yep.
like, yes, you went through trauma. The whole crew has been through trauma. Like, we went to this parallel universe. We've been through all of
the
these
Klingon
things.
War.
We've been through so much.
We cry every episode.
We could make a clean break for it. I'm willing to give up what I've built in my career because my relationship with you is more important. And that could have been a loaded thing to deal with as well.
Yep.
Because that's Stamets trying to address the problem, but not addressing the cause of the issue.
There would still be a disconnect there because we never had a deep understanding of their relationship for that to be something that would be satisfying to actually experience. But also, even in their relationship when he was alive,
we know how much Paul values his work. We understand
we
how
understand
much of a
that.
sacrifice that would be.
Yes.
We understand that part of it. So that would have at least made some sense if they chose to use that as a jumping off
There's just
point.
a disconnect here because it's supposed to be, we're supposed to be feeling off because Hugh is off. He's not the Hugh we knew. He's all moody and angry and he can fight.
Throwing trays all over the place.
He can
left,
fight.
right,
Center.
center.
He can fight and he can punch and he can lift people up in the air and smack them down and all these things that we never were expecting to come out of Hugh. And it's supposed to be like, oh no, this is troubling because this isn't the Hugh we know. But again, we never got to know Hugh, so this could have been in his character the whole time. We never got to know him. All he was a bury your gaze trope, and now it's a resurrect your gaze. And I just struggle because I'm watching this and I'm going, this feels false. It feels contrived. It feels like it's padding out the time, and it feels like we needed
I thought
to.
we were onto the Hugh-dar, not the whole season recap.
But I gotta ask you a question now.
Mm-hmm.
Is Ash Tyler really sorry that he killed them?
I think he is.
Why do you say it with trepidation?
Because he doesn't take ownership over it.
Thank you.
Because he is sorry that his body was used, but he does not see it as him having committed the murder, because they make it very clear in those first few episodes of this season in particular that it was Vok. It was Vok. It was Vok.
But they keep mentioning that he is Vok. That I am Vok. 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 I am Vok.
I don't even know who I am anymore. Who do you think you're talking to?
I love how much Ash Tyler sucks because there's
You
this.
say that now. You
No,
say that now.
I
You
know.
will eat your words.
I love there's this moment where at the very end he pulls the old "you're not so different, you and I" trick where Hugh's like, I don't even know who I am anymore, and he's like, yep, you know who you're talking to, right?
You're talking to. No, bad writers. Bad.
I love it. I love how corny it is. I mean, I hate it, but it makes me smile and chuckle because they think that this is so poetic and so meaningful. And the actors are saying it with this potency.
They're great.
And Wilson Cruz is like, this is the best performance, this is the best story I've ever done in my entire career. And it's like, oh, fuck off.
Oh, this is Emmy-worthy, guys. Emmy-worthy.
What would you give this episode?
The yum. This is Emmy-worthy, guys. Emmy-worthy.
This is always a yum, and it's still a yum.
This is Emmy-worthy, guys. Emmy-worthy.
I often looked at this episode and said, now, this is the worst episode of the show. I disagree with that theory now. I do not think it's the worst episode of the show. I still hate the Hugh Resurrection one. I still hate Point of Light.
Because it gets worse, or because this wasn't as bad as you thought it was?
No. It's still yum. But what I'm saying is, we've had episodes before this that I've been more viscerally hate-filled towards. It is the fact of...
Yeah, I want to understand, this was the bottom for you. How has it been transformed? Is it more because we've rewatched it, or because we've watched season 3?
It's because I understand the mechanics of the show, and this makes sense for what this show is.
And you understand those mechanics because we've rewatched the show with more analytical
with an analytical point of view. I surrender myself to it far more than I will ever with The Wolf Inside or Point of Light or Saints of Imperfection. It's still a terrible episode to me, but people love it because remember Star Trek. I do.
And that's why I still despise this episode, because it is so lazy to me.
But it's a 10 out of 10 because Nan got to say some lines, so yum yum.
Yum yum.
Next week's episode is a very memorable one. Season 2, Episode 9, Project Daedalus. It is the episode, it comes at a 7.9, and the summary goes as such. The Discovery crew infiltrates Section 31's headquarters, and suspicions arise that the crew may have a traitor in their midst. Meanwhile, Burnham tries to help Spock, but her efforts don't go as planned. Oh boy.
From that description,
it makes it sound...
I remember nothing.
Oh, this is the one where Arium dies. Spoiler.
That's what I was just like, wait, is that when that happened?
It's the one where they try to shove in that Arium's like an important character by making her the focus, which is very funny because you know she's going to die at the end because they make her the focus of the episode because it's really funny and they explain what Arium is.
And it feels more like they're filmed cutscenes from a video game because they're like doing kind of puzzles to get through each of the doors or something like that. That's what I remember.
Episode. So we'll be talking about that one next week. You can hit us up on those social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, all of those.
YumYumPod, or shoot us an email at yumyumpod@gmail.com, and check out our Patreon if you want to hear more of us. And
more of our Voyager deep cuts, huh?
And maybe even hearing us talk about things that we do just genuinely like.
Yeah, like Star Trek 5.
I do like Star Trek 5.
No, you don't. No one likes it. You like it in the camp fashion. What does God need with a starship?